You know, Mini Habits looks completely harmless. Mini Habits honestly doesn't sound like a threat at all. In fact, Mini Habits by Stephen Gies probably sounds way too small for whatever problem you're trying to solve. But to really get Mini Habits, you've got to understand that Stephen Gies found a hidden doorway that almost all high performers just completely miss. The door isn't courage. It isn't giving yourself some hype speech in the mirror. It's a tiny act that slips right past your body's alarm system. The title sounds gentle, sure, but the methodology? It's razor sharp. It strips away your absolute favorite excuse. You can still say your goal matters. You can still want that larger life. You just lose the right to demand the whole life before you've even done the first rep.
Your promise gets bigger the moment your day gets worse. Think about it for a second. This is the exact pattern, isn't it? A really hard day arrives and, logically, your plan should probably shrink, but instead, it grows. You miss your morning workout, so what do? You promise yourself a brutal 2-hour session tomorrow to make up for it. You skip a day of reading, so you promise a massive, long weekend reset. You break the streaks, so you raise the stakes. And hey, that looks noble. But really, it's just self-sabotage dressed up in clean clothes. You're raising the stakes right after a failure, which is exactly why you keep failing. The habit falls apart because the cue is asking for a whole new identity before your body has even completed one tiny motion.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the trap of big promises, or why we need to lower the entry point. Now let's slow this right down. Pride keeps making us choose a doorway that's just way too tall to cross. I want you to hold on to one specific image for this entire explainer of this book. Imagine a translucent cell membrane. Not a solid brick wall, not a steel prison. Just a soft, flexing membrane. It naturally flexes to let a tiny, quiet signal pass through. But if you hit it with heavy, sudden force, it instantly hardens and blocks you out. We love to call our failed habits a willpower problem, but this book calls it a threshold problem. You made the habit large enough to respect, and then your body made it large enough to resist. So don't start by raising the vow. Lower the entry point.
Now let's look at the mechanics of this. Think about activation cost. That's the felt effort required before an action even starts. The old model of behavior change tells us to set a goal that scares us, right? Raise the target to raise your commitment. Sounds fantastic on paper, feels really strong, but in practice, it actually trains resistance. A massive promise gives your mind a massive case to argue against. Your brain just says, nope, not now, not today, not in this mood, the floor's messy, the day's ruined, the real start deserves a totally clean week. You are literally handing your mind all the evidence it needs to shut that cell membrane tight.
I can hear the objection already. You're probably sitting there thinking, look, I wish this weren't true. I already know what to do. I just need to force the consistency. And I hear you. But this book proves that knowledge absolutely cannot bypass a threshold that is too large. Knowing the right move isn't the same as actually passing the threshold. You might know the perfect routine, the exact timing, the ideal sequence, but the body meets the next step, not the theory. If that next step feels even slightly too large, all your vast knowledge just becomes a witness. It just sits there watching you fail with more detail. Relying on force is a design error.
Moving into Section 2, let's talk about the baseline versus the bonus, and why the bonus is definitely not the contract. This brings us to a really fascinating point, exposing how pride absolutely ruins our habits. And ironically, it ruins them on our strongest days. Let me explain. There is an absolutely critical difference between your baseline and your bonus. The baseline is your daily minimum. The bonus is anything extra. So, what usually happens? You have a great day. You do some extra work. You feel incredibly proud. And then your pride illegally upgrades that bonus into your new daily contract. That flexible membrane that let a small signal pass today is now bracing for a massive load tomorrow.
Look at how clearly this is mapped out here. 1 push-up is the baseline. 10 push-ups, that's a bonus. The baseline is the literal contract you sign with yourself. The bonus is just an optional gift. But under the pressure of trying to be great, that cell membrane swells up and hardens. You find yourself trapped in a dilemma. Do I keep the high standard to prove I'm serious, or do I lower the standard and admit I'm lazy? Well, both options hide the exact same misunderstanding. The standard isn't the grand achievement. The standard is simply showing up at the doorway.
This leads us to a brilliant reversal. The old model says raise the target, but the refinement from this book says the action should feel almost beneath you. Think about that. The smaller habit is actually the more honest habit. Why? Because it tests exactly what you can accomplish when your pride gets absolutely zero reward. It tells you what happens when there's no motivational speech, when your mood is completely tanked, and when the act isn't anywhere near impressive enough to brag about.
That unflattering truth is infinitely sharper than your ambition.
Now for Section 3, Identity Trails the Action. It's all about contact over claims. Stephen Guise argues that a massive plan is essentially just lying to you. A massive plan lets you feel change before the day has even tested you. You get all the emotional reward of being a serious person without actually doing any of the work. A tiny act cannot hide like that. It either happened or it didn't. It strips away all the theater and gives the day a clean, undeniable yes or no. It is entirely about contact over claims.
Again, I totally know the internal pushback here. I wish this weren't true. Once I become the kind of person who trains daily, then I'll train daily. We all desperately want the identity first. But you cannot wait for belief. This book dismantles that idea entirely. You don't get the identity first. You ask for one single contact point. Then you repeat the contact. The baseline stays incredibly small because the body learns through that repeat contact, not through heroic speeches. That is exactly how trust builds, at body speed.
Let's look at another angle here. Willpower is not the villain in this story. The problem is that we just keep asking willpower to do architectural design work. Willpower is just a starter spark. It's highly expensive energy, so we have to lower the activation cost instead of just yelling at the body's membrane to open up. Shrink the door, but keep the room. If the membrane blocks the signal, you don't curse the cell for being weak, you just change the size of the message.
Let's bring it back to that anchor, the flexing cell membrane. A tiny dot pressing through, pulsing, finally being admitted. It doesn't open for your grand speeches, it only opens for the signal it can actually admit. I'll confess something to you here. This isn't what we really want. We secretly crave a dramatic rebirth. We want that cinematic montage where the old self is just cut away in one glorious afternoon. But this book offers a deeply unflattering, tiny, daily proof instead. It's not a lesser life, it is simply the first proof that life can move without all the drama. This brings us to Section 4, Pain the Ego Tax, which is what happens when the act stops being impressive. Now we really must confront the hidden cost of this entire methodology, the ego tax. Your ego is going to absolutely hate this cure. A mini habit can feel childish. One push-up feels like a total joke. One sentence feels like a fake writing life. But that feeling isn't a flaw in the system. That is the literal tax you pay when your action feels too small to defend your rank. It stops making you look impressive to yourself.
And this pays off our earlier point perfectly. When you pay that ego tax and you genuinely separate the baseline from the bonus, everything changes. A strong day doesn't promote the minimum. A weak day doesn't erase your streak. And because the baseline is safe, the extra work, the bonus, feels incredibly alive. You're doing more because the door is open, not because you're trying to avoid shame. It turns the act from a daily trial into a joyful return.
This brings us to a pretty heavy question. Will you cross the doorway when there is no glory? You face a choice here. Trust motivation and wait for the right state, or distrust motivation and shame yourself into motion. Both of those make your feelings the engine. But a big standard is really just a hiding place. It lets you fail with dignity. You can just say the mountain was too high. A tiny standard removes that cover completely. The swelling promises we make are really just identity work masking our fear. Let the proof do the work instead.
And finally, Section 5. Make it too small. This is the final doorway. We are at the final doorway now. Pride kept choosing a door that was way too tall to cross. Willpower completely burned out trying to kick it down. The start must be smaller than the argument. The habit has to meet the body before the story in your head gets loud. So you can release the metaphor now. Just keep the rule. Make it too small.
Here is the exact practice derived from this book. Step 1, pick one habit you keep restarting and cut it down until it feels utterly silly. Seriously, after brushing your teeth, just do one push-up. Step 2, do not raise the baseline tomorrow, no matter how amazing you feel. Step 3, let the bonus grow completely independently. The contract stays tiny. And step 4, mark the proof by hand.
A simple paper dot on a calendar is enough. That dot matters because it ends the internal debate. It doesn't praise you, it doesn't call you a hero, it merely records contact. It says the act crossed the threshold and the day did not get a vote. Tomorrow gets the exact same small gate. No drama gets special rights. The act stays clean. The proof stays cheap.
Use this book as the practice gate, not for hype, for proof. Before tomorrow, do one push-up after brushing teeth and mark a paper dot. Go to upgowise.com and access your personal growth map.
300s. Set a trigger, choose one absurd action, and mark tonight's dot. Without it, signature fades. Make it too small to refuse.